So this talk is sponsored by the Central Virginia node of the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, or a state program establishing Virginia as a global center in excellence in cybersecurity research through supporting research, workforce development, and innovation at the intersection between cybersecurity, autonomous systems, and intelligence. And each year, CCI and CVN sponsor research and experiential learning projects. So today's speaker is a recipient of that funding. Mircea is the director of computer engineering at the University of Virginia, as well as the Virginia Microelectronics Consortium. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Professor at the university. His research focuses on the areas of AI hardware, processing and memory, cyber physical systems, computational RFID, spintronics, and nanoelectronics. Dr. Stan received a PhD and an MS from UMass Amherst and currently leads the High Performance Low Power Lab and is an associate director of the Center Automated Processing. Today, he will be sharing his insights on cryptag, computational RFID, and privacy and trust in IoT applications. So you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. And since we have a small audience, please feel free to interrupt for any clarifying questions. I will leave some time at the end of the talk for more discussions as necessary. First, about the motivation for our work. Basically, we are interested in IoT, where there is this vision of trillion things. There is this concept of an Internet of trillion things, where our entire life would be enhanced by the availability of data from these sensors. Of course, when you have a trillion things, having batteries, having to charge batteries, having to replace batteries is basically impossible. So that's why there is this desire to have a scenario in which no batteries are needed. And there is a lot of interest in energy harvesting. And for the purposes of what we are doing, we are, having this taxonomy of different types of energy harvesting. And there are some that are not available all the time. Most of the energy harvesting actually solutions are not available continuously. Solar, wind, body movements. And we basically have this analogy. If you look at the human history, that being the phase of hunter-gatherer, where if you have something to harvest, you do. If you don't, then you need to wait. There are some that are continuous, but again, those are only available in some specific places like hydroelectric, steam pipe, body heat. So yes, if you have a way to use those, it is very good. But the best one would be one in which you do harvest energy, but that is deterministic. In other words, you don't depend on on chance. And that's the one that we are looking at. And the typical one is wireless power transmission, where you have full control over how you transmit that power that gets harvested. And that would be the far more further phase. If you look now at RF power harvesting, again, you can kind of make the same classification between intentional, which is the one where you have full control, versus you can also harvest RF energy from existing sources like local TV stations, radio stations, but those are kind of back to the old kind of hunter-gatherer type. So we are going to go for the intentional. There is one technology that's ubiquitous that uses this type of energy harvesting, and that is RFID. And RFID has been introduced in commercial applications to replace the old UPC code for inventory. And basically, it uses electromagnetic fields, either near field or UHF or microwave, to identify and track basically tags, and can be attached to all kinds of objects. And again, the market for that is, in the billions of dollars. Um, and a typical UHF RFID system, like something that we base our work on, looks like this, where you have a reader. The reader, again, is really, you can think of it as the transmitter, and that one is obviously powered by regular AC power, and that transmits a UHF signal. And then there are many, many tags, hundreds, thousands of tags. And these are the ones that are very small, inexpensive. They have to be inexpensive because basically they are, every object would have one, batteryless, and that work in conjunction with the reader to create this system where you can have multiple objects, boxes, merchandise that you can keep track of, where they are, and if they are there. Now, to give an analogy of how this miracle happens, where the batteryless tag can communicate with a powered transmitter, I have this analogy of, let's say you have two people on the peaks of two mountains, and they want to communicate with each other. And again, let's say this is they only have light to communicate with each other. And one way, if each of them has a flashlight, they can transmit information, let's say Morse code, and communicate. But the question is, what happens if one of them doesn't have a flashlight? Can they communicate? And this maybe the surprising answer is that yes, they can communicate. If if the one without a flashlight has a mirror, having a mirror, if the one with a flashlight keeps the flashlight on, then the mirror can be used to modulate the reflected light and communicate information. And that's exactly how RFID works, except it's done in the RF, electromagnetic field world, but is basically reflecting back, or it's called backscatter in this context, the waves to the reader. Now, the simple RFID tags, as they are not very useful for the applications that we are interested in. What we are interested in is to augment these simple RFID tags with some kind of more complex functions. Specifically, we would like to be able to sense the environment, maybe temperature, maybe vibration, and then maybe do some primitive kind of signal processing, and maybe maybe even some form of AI. And again, this has this name of computational RFID, just to emphasize that there is this computational element to it. The applications that there are several applications that we are very much interested in. One is in what's called Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is trying to do what's called predictive maintenance as opposed to preventive maintenance. In other words, you only do maintenance when you expect something bad to happen. And for that, you need some relatively complex anomaly detection, And in general, it's uh, relatively hard to deploy everywhere. In order to deploy everywhere, you really need inexpensive kind of low footprint solutions, and that's what we are after with this with the goal of our project with computational RFID, because again, you don't need batteries, so you can deploy easily. You kind of have a split sense and transmit solution. Um, you can have many sensors for each transmitter, so this allows a fine-grained monitoring of the equipment, um, and you can measure vibration, temperature, and do some kind of anomaly detection. And of course, for this, this brings us to this project, there are security implications because the communication for RFID is what's called in the open. So in principle, you can have bad actors, hijack the system. And this is an example of what we are looking for, basically having some kind of a pump motor that we can instrument with our computational RFID. Um, the idea of computational RFID is not ours. This has happened maybe about almost 20 years ago. And it started actually at Microsoft, and then it moved to the University of Washington in Seattle. Um, and it was a very interesting project. It was called the WISP project, but it was relatively heavy, on the computational part. So it had an actual microcontroller, MSP430, all kinds of electronics. And because of that, the functionality was good, but the range, because it needed, relatively high power energy, the range was not great. So it limits the kind of application. So we're looking for much simpler solution that don't necessarily need a microcontroller. And we call this computational RFID 2.0. And we are trying to use as much as possible commercial off-the-shelf components, because those have, again, the advantage of being less expensive, more mature. And we are planning to replace the heavy microcontroller with a non-volatile memory, ultra-low power FPGA. And then we are planning the original computational RFID module used the conventional reader, but because of that, all of the functionality in some sense had to happen on the tag. So we are planning to migrate more functionality to the reader, to a custom reader that we are basically developing based on a development module. And we are also um, improving on the range by using what we call a pseudo BAP. BAP means battery assisted. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then, there's also some work on metal compatible antenna. An important aspect of energy harvesting with RF is this concept of asymmetric duty cycling. And I'm going to go very briefly over it, but it's kind of intuitive. If you have a constant source of power, and if you have some kind of energy storage, like a capacitor or even a battery that rechargeable, and your power requirements are higher than what the source can provide, you can duty cycle your functionality in a way that you basically store energy for a longer period of time, and then you just compute or use that energy at a higher power level for a shorter period of time. And again, in principle, ratios as high as 10 times. If your power is 10 times more than the power that's available, if you just function a tenth of the time, you are still going to be able to do what you need. And this is basically achieved with this pseudo battery assistive passive mode. And again, I'm not going to go into details, but it's this idea of asymmetric duty cycling for a long time on an onboard capacitor. And that has multiple advantages. One advantage is that your functionality can be higher, but also interestingly, even the range improves. Another application where this is kind of a vision for the future. I can imagine that the living room of the future, in the same way that nowadays it has, you have a Wi-Fi antenna, and maybe some other things, maybe uh, you know, uh, Alexa device that communicates with some devices. In the same way, you are going to have an RFID reader antenna with several or many computational RFID sensor tags that then can give you information about things happening in the room, and allowing for a much more targeted, for example, environment, in terms of maybe um, temperature, or even detecting the different chemicals and things like that. Now, I mentioned security, and this is really everything until now was kind of an introduction to the whole project, just to have a context. Now, I mentioned that the conventional communication between RFID readers and tags is open, so there is really no security whatsoever. So we are looking at introducing at least some elements of security, and an important one is basically a way to identify the tags and make sure that they are not in some sense malicious. And an important concept in security, in hardware security, is that one based on physical unclonable functions. And this is, about 20 years old idea by now, but it's very similar to a fingerprint, in the same way that we humans have fingerprints that are used to identify us, in many different situations. In the same way, integrated circuits can have circuits on them that are going to be unique to each integrated circuit, in the same way that a fingerprint is unique to each of us. And this is based on different kinds of delays of wires, gates, process variations. And what's important is that the path be unique. Like I said, a fingerprint has to be unique. If there are multiple people with the same fingerprints, that can cause real trouble. It needs to be reliable. If the fingerprint changes in time, then it's not very useful, because the individual loses the ability to identify themselves. And it needs to be unpredictable. In other words, it shouldn't be possible for a malicious adversary to recreate, a valid fingerprint. And again, the assumptions are it's infeasible to model accurately a puff. It's the output collision probability, which is this uniqueness, is constant. And another important one, which is actually very hard to do, but if you tamper with a puff, it should somehow modify it, so that you don't get in problems. Okay. Now, again, I'm not going to. There is a whole literature on puffs, but an important distinction is between what's called a weak puff and a strong puff. And this is a relatively busy slide. So what's going on here is that the way a puff solution works is that there is this concept of a challenge response. And again, in terms of the analogy with the fingerprint, you can think of that as a challenge is basically, when you go and someone is taking your fingerprint and it says, okay, put your finger here on the, whatever, the sensor for the fingerprint. And the response is, the fingerprint that comes out from that thing. And our own human fingerprint is what would be called a weak puff, a weak fingerprint, because basically we only have a limited number of such fingerprints. We basically have, the 10 fingers, and maybe you can count the toes, I guess. So there are not that many. On the other hand, there are applications where you would really like to have many, many more challenge response pairs. And those are called strong puffs. I should also note that for all these puff-based applications, like for a fingerprint, there needs to be a database where you store these challenge response pairs, and such that you are able to verify the identity of the different puffs or systems based on the puff. I'm not going to spend almost any time here. This is more, as an FYI, to kind of see the wide range of puffs that are being looked at by the community. And you can see that basically the ones on top are based on all kinds of clocks, ring oscillator, time domain, and those are based on kind of delays. And then there are the ones on the bottom that are based on some kind of a memory, or I should say in the middle, that are based on some kind of a memory. And again, the idea is that each bit of a memory is somewhat unique and can provide a relatively large set of elements for the fingerprint. And I should also say that these are just the electronic puffs that people are looking at. There are non-electronic puffs also that are of interest at the system level. So the electronic puffs are interesting at the kind of at the chip level, or small board level, but at the system level there are many, many others that I'm not going to talk about. Some work, just to show you that we've been working on related things for some time. This is almost 10 years old by now. We looked at at an SRAM puff. and again, this is a weak path. Why is it weak? Because again, most of the bits in an SRAM, uh, how does this work first? So this works on this idea that an SRAM has 6 transistor bit cells, which are um, um, ideally they are very well balanced in terms of one side and the other, but because of parameter variations, for many bits, one side is going to be stronger than the other side. And basically what happens at power on, when you just power this, the one that's, the stronger one, there's going to be a conflict there. And one side is going to win. For the ones that are purely balanced, that, whichever sides wins changes, every time, and is really based just um, on thermal noise. But for the ones that are imbalanced, they are only going to be all the time, or most of the time, 1, and most of the time 0. And those are going to be part of the fingerprint. Again, to understand, maybe for people that are not familiar with this concept of flip-flop and how that creates this metastable condition, you can think like you see here on the left, you see these shapes. If you think about something like that as being a hill, and you have a ball on the top of the hill, if the ball is exactly in the middle of the top of the hill, is going to be well balanced, and it may stay there for indeterminate amount of time. But any maybe breeze, or any maybe a bird flapping the wings, is going to have that ball fall one side or the other, and that's the 0 and the 1. And of course, if the top of the hill is not perfectly smooth, if it has some kind of bias one way or another, all of the time the ball is going to go in one direction. What you see on the right side is basically a graphical representation of what I was talking about. So the dots that are all that are all black, you can think of them as the ones that are strong ones. The ones that are white, they are strong zeros, and then there are some gray ones, which are sometimes 1, sometimes 0. And again, this is a measurement done on an actual physical SRAM with repeating the power on, for I'm not sure how many times, maybe 100 times, and getting this probability that the bit is a 1 or a 0. Now, our interest at the time was how to attack such an SRAM path. As you know, if you are working in security, many times the work on attacks is as interesting or as exciting and as the one on the actual ensuring security part. So what we're looking at here is this concept of wear out and recovery. And I'm not going to go into details, especially since I see time flies. But the idea is that transistors in a modern chip actually change their behavior in time depending on the stress. And specifically, they get slower as they are stressed. And stress means applying a voltage on them. And what we are able to show is on this graph, on this drawing on the right side here, the going down part on the left, the yellow, the first slope down is the the wear out, basically the frequency going down, as you see on the y-axis. But then we show that we can also recover from that wear out by using different techniques, what we call active and accelerated recovery. It's basically applying voltages of the opposite sign and applying higher temperatures. What we showed with this was that we can actually attack an SRAM path. So basically, we show that we can take bits that are strong ones and switch them to strong zeros and vice versa. And the implications of this are pretty serious, actually, on the SRAM path world, because it means that if you give me a fingerprint, in other words, if you give me the location of the strong ones and strong zeros on a chip that's you have and that you want to keep it as a unique fingerprint, I can use wear out and recovery to actually program that exact fingerprint on another SRAM. So and we showed basically how long it takes, it does take in the order of days to be able to do this, but it's a very interesting result. Now these are weak puffs. We are also interesting in strong puffs. And the typical example, and now we are getting to the current focus of the project. We would really like to have strong paths that basically have many challenge response pairs. And a typical example of such a strong path is what's called an arbiter path, and that's the the one on the left. And the idea with the arbiter path is very simple. You have a bunch of multiplexers. So all those boxes on the left are each of them is a multiplexer, and you apply the bits of a challenge. So again, there is this concept of a challenge response pair. A challenge is really just a number. And in this case, a binary number with n bits. And you apply each bit of that binary number to the mux, to the select line of the mux. And that means that the mux is where the select line is 1, and they are going to have this cross, where the input 0 goes to output 1 and input 1 goes to output 0. And the ones that have 0, they are going to go straight. And because of process variations, the path, the delay path of each of these paths, whether it's straight or crossed, is going to be slightly different. So that means that for different challenge bits, I'm going to have a slightly different delay on the two paths that go from the input to the output. So now, if I apply a pulse on the input, at the output I have this arbiter. So an arbiter means that it checks whether input 0 comes first or input 1 comes first. If input 0 comes first, then it outputs a 0. If input 1 comes first, it outputs a 1. So it means that this path is is going to give you different outputs for different inputs. So it's a strong path. The problem with this path is that it's been shown that is very prone to machine learning attacks, and a machine learning algorithms can easily learn the basically the path. So people have then tried to come up with other types of strong paths like this cascaded path, but then they become quite large. So our idea, and I'm getting now to finally the idea of the project, is to combine a weak path with a crypto core in order to get a strong path. And again, I'll show how that looks like. But the idea is that we are trying to get the good metrics of a path, like uniqueness, reliability, randomness, and especially area, power, and cost, with a simpler implementation than some of the more complex strong paths. So how does that work? Well, so you basically, if you look at weak path, the and again, the SRAM path, bus keeper path, D flip-flop path, there are several models. All paths work on this challenge response concept. So the idea that we are looking at is to have a simpler, smaller path, and use a crypto core to provide a much larger number of challenge response pairs. Again, the hope here is that because it uses a crypto core, it will be kind of by default also resilient to ML attacks. Of course, we need to verify this. And something else that helps us in this project is a pipe framework that is available, which is open source, that allows for easy comparison among different paths. The first that we looked at was to enhance this path crypto core with an AES crypto core. This works relatively well. And here are some results. Basically, if you compare for example, the arbiter path, it's very vulnerable to logistic regression. So basically, this 0.999 number here means that there is a probability of almost, very close to 1 to identify that bit, basically. Similarly, for another, path, this XOR arbiter path, again, and this is a different type of machine learning attack, but again, it can identify very easily. On the other hand, if you look at our AES path, it is resilient to both attacks. So basically 0.5 is the best you can hope for, because again, what that means is, what is the probability that a given bit is a 1 or a 0? And if the probability is 0.5, basically you cannot tell whether it's a 1 and a 0, and you can see it's very close to that. The one issue with the AES is that AES is relatively heavy as a crypto core. So we very quickly started to look at more lightweight crypto solutions. And for example, Ascon is the recent, I mean, it happened not this year, last year. There was a crypto contest for lightweight crypto organized by NIST. And this Ascon was the winner of that contest. And if we use this Ascon in conjunction with weak puff, again we get very good results in terms of resilience to machine learning attacks. So again, we are continuing kind of this investigation by looking at other for example, Present and Gift are two other competitors in the NIST lightweight security competition. And of course, eventually we are interested in implementing these on the, in hardware. So for now, we have done an estimation by doing a synthesis and place and route in a 14 nanometer FinFET technology. And as expected, the AES area is quite large, but some of the lightweight solutions like this Present crypto is much less. We also looked at implementing these on FPGAs. And we actually implemented a bunch. So we are comparing against a bunch that were reported in a paper, but our solutions, at the bottom is quite competitive. And I think with this, I'm pretty much done. The only thing that I just want to acknowledge my collaborators, Professor Bob Klenke from VCU, who is a co-PI on this project, and the graduate students that are working on the project, Emin Gao at UVA and John Chilaka at VCU. Some photos with my research group in happy times. And I also would like to acknowledge the funding from CVN that we are very thankful for. With this, I think we have 10 minutes for questions and answers. I don't think we have that many online or in, but I would like to have some Q&A to see how this went. Thank you very much.
If anyone has any questions, they can go ahead and unmute themselves, or you can also drop it in the chat too.
Okay, so there is one question on chat. How do you think this research will affect the actual individual in the future? Okay, so I think there are two levels to the question. One level is the general project, which is the kind of the computational RFID project with this concept of battery-less sensors and things like that. And again, the question is a little bit tricky because it asks about the individual. and it's going to affect the individual, maybe both directly but mostly indirectly. So indirectly, if we are successful in deploying such systems, let's say in chemical factory, or any kind of things like that, um, the the indirect effect is that those products, well, so that the factory is going to work, more, it will be more effective in terms of, again, using this preventive maintenance, so less downtime, less cost for maintenance, um, maybe less pollution also, depending on what happens. And ultimately, this should affect the individual by making, products, maybe gasoline, or, maybe some, textiles, whatever, cheaper, right? So that's kind of very, very, very indirect, very, very many steps. More direct way could be that, office or living room of the future, in which you could have, um, a much, much more, much more information about what's going on, um, in the office, in the room, and being able to take some action based on uh, the output of the sensors. Now, that was about the general project. Specifically about the security part, I think, um, again, the effect on the individual, um, is it could be a lot or little. And what I mean by that is that, like I said, right now, uh, this protocol is open. And there are many ways in which, security concerns could become serious. Now, how likely, I mean, if you look at how we live our lives, we do not, unfortunately, pay attention to many security things. We click on, acknowledge all kinds of, you know privacy. We give our privacy away every time we use a computer, so it's hard to tell. But at least some awareness of security aspects for these types of protocols, I think, is important.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We really appreciate it. It was very informative. And thank you everyone for taking the time out to be here and to listen, and to ask questions. We really appreciate it. Everyone should go follow CCI-CVN on LinkedIn and on Instagram as well. We have these talks every week. So next week we will have Dr. Sarah Riggs, who is also from UVA. So we're really excited to have her next week.